So today we're going to talk about Canadian Prepper's latest video, He Has a Bad Feeling. And we're going to relate that to all the large channels. So this is going to encompass Dirty Civilian, Canadian Prepper, Full Spectrum Survival, City Prepper, Alaska Prepper, and all of the large gun survival channels. And also the Leviathan group, that is one of the mass marketing networks that works YouTube and controls a lot of the advertising and discussion online in the farms and survival field. What we're going to do is get to the crux of the issue. Canadian Prepper in his video talked about censorship and how this is increasing with the increasing bad news coming from the war in Ukraine, as well as other things going on around the world that are related to the NATO-Russia conflict. Now, I want to remind everybody, all this was predicted in an old video of mine. It's nothing unexpected. These actions were expected as ways to distribute the fight over the globe, to take pressure off of forces in country in Ukraine and in Russia, and to have a soft war prior to a major direct confrontation. So Canadian Prepper talks extensively about how recently some voices and channels, they've been deleted from YouTube and other social media, and the censorship's getting worse. What's really happening is large channels are now falling under the censorship that's been common for the last 10 years. And the reason for this is there are certain narratives they want put out there. And these large channels, including Canadian Prepper, also share in the censorship operation. And the way they do this is they limit the discussion online and in their comment sections. All these big channels will block people if they think that their discussions hurt their economic interests or they disagree with what they're portraying online. So of course I fall into that category. And the reason is, when we look at these large channels, another channel come out and said, if these people are not helping you, they're your enemy. So that's something you're going to have to decide on your own. Are these channels your enemy? And one way to look at this is the fallacy that they are promoting. And most of my comments on their channels and their comments on my channels were based upon disagreements with what they were saying. And with me, I don't care what you say as long as it's family oriented and there's not a lot of real negativity and direct attacks on people. These channels don't agree with that approach. So let's get down to the nitty-gritty. Basically, all these large channels we discussed, they fall into one of two categories: LARPing for profit, or they believe you can purchase your way out of SHTF by buying what they're selling. And of course, I fundamentally disagree with that, because the prepper mentality is good for short duration emergencies, because you'll quickly run out of stuff. And you may have a massive stockpile in warehouse, but the problem is you're not going to have the 5 things you need to survive. So long-term survival, which they don't really talk about much, is based on building, constructing, or dying. So you have to be able to build an infrastructure to produce food, to produce goods, to produce fuel, to do work, to protect yourself, to promote logistics and transportation and trade. That's the only way you're going to make it long term. And in order to forage and salvage materials and obtain raw materials through harvesting, you've got to have some type of transportation. And in order to have transportation, you got to have routes. Now, what none of these clowns have told you is solar generators and these lithium battery storage units are short-term solutions, and they can't generate enough power to do much work on a long-term sustaining basis. And the way around that was found in the 1970s. I got into this movement around 1978. And in some of the old magazines that were published back then, they had plans for how to take lawnmower engines and run them off of steam. And most people don't realize you can do a little research and you can run lawnmower engines off of steam. So you can actually fabricate a boiler and do that. The plans for those are readily available if you look back in the 1970s and early 80s time frame. And steam pretty much is a stationary energy source for survival purposes. Now, another way around this issue is the burner building, which came out of the Arctic and subarctic in Norway, Sweden, and Finland. So what you do there is you have roughly an 8 by 8 foot building, 8 foot tall, and it's designed as a burner. So it supplies hot water and also steam. So you can use that building and you can burn all kinds of scrap, junk, firewood, pellets, debris, whatever you can find. And the heat produces both steam and hot water. So the hot water is used to heat buildings in the Arctic Circle. And it's also used to produce energy via the steam. Now, the transport and logistics key here is wood gas. People think that you're not going to have fuel after SHTF. That's not really true. You're just not going to have the type of fuel you're used to using. So FEMA did extensive studies. They made about 200 copies of how to use 2 trash cans to make a wood gas generator to power tractors and trucks and cars. And they promptly put them in federal depositories instead of distributing it. Long time ago, I got a copy of it. And on YouTube, there are hundreds of videos to how to make a wood gas generator to power vehicles. That's how your vehicles will be powered in SHTF. Now, the interesting thing about that is the fact that it's easier to adapt a vehicle that starts off its original fuel and then you start powering it with your alternative fuel. So it's easier to convert one that way. So if you had 20 gallons of fuel, you could use that for a year or two to start your vehicle and then switch it over to the wood gas once it's running. Now, during World War II in Europe, wood gas was used extensively to power vehicles in occupied lands. So the areas that the Nazis occupied in Europe and the Japanese occupied in the Pacific, there was no fuel supply to most of the civilian population, so they ran bus, trucks, and cars off of wood gas. So what we're looking at here is improvised and expedient construction and materials, which I've spent years making videos and putting on here. That is the way you survive, not buying junk. So that's the difference between us. Please share your comments. We'll see you on the next video.